Who is Kang? Who is Doctor Doom? Who is this guy? One of these questions might be answered. Issue 3 of Ultimate Invasion is here, picking up where Issue 2 left off and spanning about 3 time periods. Issue 3 gives us a look at the way that Earth 6160 functions. Back in Issue 2, we learned a bit about how the Earth was divided, all under the Maker living in Latveria. Some of the leaders included Howard Stark and Obadiah Stane of the North American Union, Sunfire of the Land of Fire, the Rasputins of the Eurasian Republic, and Hulk of the Children of Eternal Light. In this issue, we are introduced to the other world leaders as well as given the official designations for each country or territory. Now, looking at the dots, we can see how the territories are marked, and if you notice, this black dot is called an undiscovered country, which based on its place in Africa, even though I don't believe that's how it's placed in the 616 universe, I theorize that this is actually Wakanda, as with their technology, I think they may have the best chance of having remained independent of the Maker in this world. So in the last issue, Obadiah Stane was killed during an attack from cloned Ultimates from the future, which now leaves Howard Stark as the sole leader of the North American Union. After that attack, the world leaders met in an ambassador's room where the Captain Britain of the European Coalition, as well as the Upper and Lower Kingdoms, are introduced, as well as Emmanuel da Costa of the Society of South America. Because Howard used to leave diplomacy and politics to Obadiah while he handled the science, he was absolutely dumbfounded to learn how the world actually works. He thought the Rasputins were his enemy, because on a global scale, most of the world is at war with the Eurasian Republic. But the Maker reveals the truth, that war in this world is simply a game put in place to have the citizens of each country looking outwards, focused on an artificially inspired international conflict, instead of looking inward at all the problems of their individual countries. It's basically controlled hatred and chaos. I'm not sure when Hickman wrote this, but it's ridiculously relevant given that the US government is trying to keep the people's focus on this proxy war with Russia, rather than having people look inward to see the corruption and infringement on people's liberty, not to mention the decades that the country was at war in the Middle East. Currently, it's the Eurasian Republic's turn to play the bad guy. Guess whose turn it is next? And do you know what this reminds me of? My fellow Naruto fans might remember the ultimate plan of Pain, the leader of the elite ninja group known as the Akatsuki, whose plan was to create the equivalent of a weapon of mass destruction. This weapon would be periodically used on a random country once every generation, so that everyone would be too scared to start a war. It's controlled pain and chaos, because just as the Maker realized, you can't truly create everlasting peace. Is Tony Stark the Kang of Earth 6160? This is just a theory backed up by virtually nothing. We don't know anything about this Kang other than that he created an army of cloned Ultimates and that he looks like the version of Kang from that old Avengers series. This theory is solely based on a conversation that Howard Stark has with his son Tony, who, remember, in this universe is both a teenager and not Iron Man. At least yet. See, a couple of days after the death of Obadiah Stane, Howard and Tony attend his funeral. Afterwards, on their way home, they're discussing the state of the world, and Howard is being somewhat cryptic about what he's learned recently. As we know, he learned how the world works and that these artificially created wars keep humanity fairly docile. Tony doesn't know the whole story, but from what he has learned, it leads him to the conclusion that everything about this world is wrong and that his dad should fight back. Now, Howard seems to have a plan of his own, or at least he's biding his time until he can come up with one. But it seems to him that maybe fighting isn't the best way to go. But Tony is fairly adamant about it. And we know that in the main Marvel universe that Tony has always been a fixer. He can't simply stand by and watch a problem go on without providing a solution. We also learned in issue 2 that Howard Stark is likely the one who created the Immortus engine, though he somehow lost his memory of that event. So my theory is that in this world, as time goes on, that Howard Stark either dies or becomes mind-controlled by the Maker, and that Tony Stark eventually steps up as the new Iron Man and starts his own war against the Maker. He eventually takes hold of the Immortus engine and figures out how to time travel, eventually becoming Kang and waging his war against the Maker from the future. This is purely theory territory. There is nothing at all saying that Tony is actually Kang, And given that there's only one issue left, I find it hard to believe that there's going to be another underlying plot thread like that unless they continue it into the actual run of this rebooted Ultimate Universe. But I thought it was an interesting theory given the state of this universe, because I find it hard to believe that the Maker wouldn't have already destroyed Kang had he existed in this universe, which leads me to believe that it may either be Howard or Tony, as they are two people who are powerful enough and intelligent enough to become Kang and are also not currently opposed to the Maker. Speaking of the Maker, towards the end of the comic, for 2 panels and 2 panels only, we learn what ultimately happened to this universe's version of Reed Richards. In issue 2, there was a list of people whose origin stories were altered by the Maker to create his perfect world, and the Fantastic Four were no exception. The Maker prevented the Fantastic Four from bathing in cosmic rays, and then afterwards killed off Sue, Johnny, and Ben. But Reed was left alive, and it seems that the Maker has put him to work and put him in a Dr. Doom mask. Now, it's important to realize that of the 4, what makes Reed special isn't his powers, but his mind. Presumably, if he's still working for the Maker, then he still retains all of his intelligence. This is obviously a huge mistake on the Maker's part, because the Maker has already learned that living in a world with another Reed Richards doesn't work out for him. Now, I don't know if the Doom mask controls this version of Reed, or if his face was somehow damaged, but I don't think there's any way that this Reed doesn't turn on the Maker. In fact, the original solicitations for issue 4 stated that Doom, also known as the Anti-Maker, turns against the Maker. But Marvel has actually changed those solicitations, which I think is odd. Also keep in mind that in my review of issue 1, I stated that Hickman usually writes his stories out of order. So I think issue 4 is going to reveal that the Maker's first step in taming this universe was changing the life of this universe's Reed and figuring out a way to control him. Which will be interesting to see how he either controlled Reed Richards or inspired him to work for him. I know a lot of people maybe see Ultimate Invasion as maybe not as good as it could be, or maybe it's hard to understand what Hickman is doing. I mostly agree with that, but again, knowing how Hickman writes, this could easily be a storyline that bleeds over into the actual Ultimate comics, and it could be that this is simply a precursor or just a taste of what is actually to come. So I don't know how Hickman is going to wrap this all up in issue 4, but I still think it'll be good. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and tell me how you think the story is going to end. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell so you never miss out on a new video. Thanks for watching.